What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today we're going to be doing a diorama lore build, and we're looking at the Imperium of Man's first contact with the Great Devourer, the Tyranid menace, I suppose you could say. So with that, we're going to be sort of going into how they first came into contact with them, and then follow up with the battle for Macragge, which is what we've based today's diorama on. So looking at First Company, Ultramarines, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with this one. Let's get on with the video and let's get going. So to begin with this build, what I wanted to get was that real sense of impending doom. So I printed out a large Tyranid sort of style model that I found on 3D Cultz, which is where I find a lot of my 3D STLs if anyone's ever interested. You can always ask me and I can find the link and I will post it to your comment. But it doesn't quite sit in the direction that I wanted it to, so we'll sort that out later. Also, as this is the Battle of Macragge, we had to use Firstborn Marines, as this was before the Primarist arrived, and I needed the legs from a assault bike. So that will, again, we'll see why I did that later. I also had leftover pieces from when I 3D printed some Tyranids last time for my battle of for Baal, where the Blood Angels were attacked by Tyranids. I had some leftover bits and I had some bits lying around, which is going to make this diorama look great. And we will be adding LED filament lights to this later on, so you might want to stick around to see how I've done that if you are interested, especially getting that flamethrower effect, which I didn't show last time I did that. So yeah, I need to right my wrong on that one, and I will go through how we did it later. But for now, we've got some modeling choices to be made with our Marines here. The first initial signs of a new Xenos species had first been discovered around the outer planets of Tyran Primus. It was an ocean world and a research station for the Imperium of Man. An explorator ship had discovered once lush and verdant worlds, now barren wastelands with no sign of anything living left, not a single organism. The Mechanicum ship came across a spore of clouds in amongst the stars whilst travelling, and some had living organisms that exploded upon proximity to the ship. At this point, they decided to make haste to Tyran Primus for necessary repairs. What they had just discovered would soon be designated as the Tyranid race and the beginning of the Tyrannic Wars. Within days, the main fleet of the Xenos race would start to descend upon the skies of Tyran Primus and begin their initial assault on the world. As the planet Tyran Primus was a frontier world, so it lied right on the edge of Imperial space, it was deemed necessary to have a formidable force to defend the planet, as it was likely for Xenos attacks. It had a fortified bunker system with 4 planetary defense weapons guarded by void shields, usually found on the Imperial spacecraft or Titans. And the way that a void shield generator works is that it distorts space-time on the point of impact against kinetic weapons or just standard ranged attacks. It also had 3 naval wings, a force of Scutari, and a full infantry regiment of Imperial Guard. I had a look and trying to find an exact number for a full regiment size. Internet says it could be anything from 2 to 50 to 100 battalions. Now, if we go off of real life, I'd say it's probably 10 battalions. So you're looking at around 1,200 to 1,300 soldiers. But still, these are the soldiers of the Imperium. These are Imperial Guard, Scutari, and 3 naval wings. So a pretty formidable force to be going up against. And I do also hope that any Blood Angel players out there will forgive me for converting this dreadnought. Thank you for your sacrifice. It hasn't been in vain, although it is now an ultramarine dreadnought, not a blood marine. Blood angel dreadnought. So, yeah, apologies. Unfortunately, there was catastrophic dog damage to the venerable dreadnought, so had to make do. 1 year after the assault on Tyran Primus, Inquisitor Cryptman came across the world and discovered nothing but a sterile, barren wasteland. The seas, every living organism, and even the atmosphere had been made vacant from this now dead world. Knowing that a data codex would have been left within the command bunker, Cryptman searched for it, and what he discovered horrified him. The videos and data files of what had happened at Tyran Primus would now designate the horror that he had found, and they would be given the morbid honour of knowing this Xenos as the TYRANIDS. Cryptman had asked his astropath to send a message in distress and also to warn other Imperial worlds, but found that he was unable to do so. This was due to the disturbance in the warp that the Tyranids caused due to their hive mind ability. So he went to the nearest Imperial world that he knew of, Foundros, found that too was vacant of all life and atmosphere. Eventually he would get a message across and was instructed to head to Macragge, the homeworld of the Ultramarines, and the Xenos fleet would be codenamed Behemoth. So for this diorama build in particular, I know I want to do a resin pour later, and I find myself using one of these picture frames that I've picked up before. And if you're in the UK, down at Hobbycraft, at the moment they are half price. Should have been £8, I only paid £4. I was pretty happy with that because, well, it's a £4 saving, what can I say? And also knowing that I'm going to be adding LEDs and lights later, I make sure to do a bit of prep work before I start covering things up. Instead of doing my usual thing of going, bugger, quickly, I need to add that now, don't I? So all I'm doing here is just prepping this so that when I do pour resin, there's not going to be any holes, and for that I'm going to be using hot glue. At the time, Manius Calgar was in charge of the Ultramarine Legion, and he quickly reacted and brought as many forces back to the Ultramar sector as possible. On a daily basis, battle barges and great space cruisers were arriving daily. They realised that Prandium, the prize and jewel of Ultramar, was going to be the first planet to make contact with Hive Fleet Behemoth. Using only the tactics dictated in the Codex Astartes, the Ultramarines did not fare well on Prandium, and the planet was lost. Manius Calgar was outraged at this news. Prandium being such an important planet to the Ultramarines and their entire system, this was a massive blow, and he knew that following the Codex Astartes would not be enough, and he would have to break this rule. After the Ultramarine fleet had withdrawn at Prandium to leave it to become biomass, Karth was next. Karth is where the Ultramarines pull new recruits and is guarded by a well-armed and well-organised PDF called the Ultramar Auxiliaire. Upon Karth is where a seemingly unheard of and unseen event happened. An extremely large and violent Carnifex, even amongst its others, was seen spearheading attacks and taking incredible amounts of damage and seemingly regenerating from all its wounds it would take, still managing to crush Lehman Russ battle tanks with almost no effort at all after taking ungodly amounts of damage. Its brutal rampage was seemingly brought to a stop when an Imperial commander fired his plasma pistol straight into the eye and brain of this Carnifex, bringing it to its final stop. Or so they believed. Moments later, the Carnifex's body began to twitch and it rose once more. Now it was missing an eye which had not regenerated and had a very distinctive plasma burn across the side of its face and skull. All defenders took note of this and later named him Old One Eye. The only planet left for the Tyranids to go now was Macragge. Calgar and Cryptman both formulated a plan. It was to be that they would split their forces on the ground into three immense fighting forces. The first company, Ultramarines, the veterans of the Legion, were to take one of the polar defences. The 7th were to take another, and the third company, Ultramarines, was to be with Manius Calgar himself. The whole premise of their fighting force now was to have a falling, moving retreat, a slow, steady-paced movement as they fought backwards, only yielding land to the dead or dying. Calgar's forces would do rearguard actions and reinforce and help where they could. Dispersing the force of the Tyranids was their main objective. Try and divide and conquer, still not really understanding the full force of what was heading their way. At this point they knew that they needed everything. Titans were awoken, night houses had arrived, there was a force in space that was ready to fight an incredible space battle against the Tyranid forces before they could even make planetfall. The hopes now was that these polar fortresses would hold long enough for the main Imperial fleet, Tempestus, to arrive. When the battle began, the most fierce of this fighting happened in these polar areas. The first company Ultramarines were having the worst of it. It is rare enough to see a Titan stride a battlefield, and rarer yet to see one pulled to the ground under the weight of teeth, gnawing and gnashing, biting and tearing at it with claws until it has submit and fallen to the floor just to be covered in chitin, its crew devoured, its immense presence no more. Further yet, as other Titans and Knights used their incredible weaponry to pocket the ground in these explosions from their Sun Fury cannons, their Mega Bolters, their Apocalypse missiles, any form of weaponry they had. All it had to do was remove a small number and the battle could be tamed. But this was not going to be the case. More and more Tyranids would arrive on a constant basis, giving way to the term that we all know and call them. They are the Great Devourer, with Marines being either eaten from the inside or out, dissolved or torn apart. The slow, steady fallback was starting to gain pace, and Manius Calgar knew that he was running out of time. As the concentration of Tyranids grew in the polar regions and onto those orbital battlements that were firing high up into orbit, Manius Calgar knew he had to turn his attention to the skies, to the battle in space. Without a victory here, Calgar knew that this had to be the final moments. Either everyone and everything here died, or the Ultramarines would be victorious. Those were his only options left. His plan now was to draw the Tyranids away from the planet in order to stop them reinforcing their ground troops. At this point, battle fleet Tempestus had arrived, now catching the Tyranids unaware between two Imperial battle fleets. Still, this may not have been enough for the thousands of ships the Tyranids had. The Imperium just couldn't match it. But the great sacrifice of the Emperor-class battleship, Dominus Astra, it crashed into the heart of the Tyranid force, causing as much damage as it could with its heavy weaponry. When it then hit the point of no return, it detonated its warp drives, creating a warp vortex that pulled a vast majority of the Tyranid fleet into it and crushing it into oblivion. So at this point in the build, we're just getting around to the part where I'm wiring up that flamethrower effect, the same that I did with the Salamander against the Great Unclean One. The whole premise is to get these LED filaments sort of lined up with the barrel of the flamethrower, and then to have them suspended in the air, and making sure obviously I've wired them all up with my horrendous soldering skills, as you can see, just for all of you to mock me for, here it is. And then once they are suspended in the air, the best thing I then find to do is then to use a bit of super glue on the cotton wool or on the filaments, and then just attach it around, making sure that it is attached to the end of that flamethrower, so it's got that real sort of feel that it's coming out. I try not to get too close to the front of the flamethrower, as that's where the promethium or the fuel for the weapon is still priming and aerating, so there wouldn't be a direct flame at the beginning, but just afterwards where it starts to take effect. So at this point in the battle, contact had long been lost with First Company Ultramarines. Their polar fortress had been completely overrun. Manius Calgar decided decided that all forces that were with him in his rearguard action were now to be deployed via drop pod into the polar regions to try and salvage and see who is left, and to fight through what is left of the Tyranids on the ground, because that was going to be the decisive victory to end this tyrannic invasion. Upon landing on the planet, the Ultramarines from the 3rd Company found themselves come under a massive hail of attack as Tyranids turned and swarmed upon them. They were fighting from the moment their drop pods opened. When they finally pushed through and got into the bunker, which once housed the 1st Company, they had to send forward flamer units first to burn out what was left of the Tyranid forces. When they finally got to some great ceramite doors piled high with bodies of Tyranids around them, they found the last of 1st Company Ultramarines, a circle of Terminators, battle brothers that fought back to back, dead in the middle of the room. What was left of the Tyranids, you ask? Well, we now know them as 2 separate hive fleets, as Hive Fleet Leviathan and Hive Fleet Kraken. Some say that the Great Devourer isn't the threat that it once was, but if you ask the 1st Company Ultramarines, it's the threat it needed to be. And Ultramar will never forget its polar defenders. If you guys have enjoyed this content, feel free to leave me a like, maybe subscribe so you can see some more. But anyway guys, thank you for joining me on this hobby adventure, and I will see you in the next one.